Alright, welcome to another video on the channel. In today's video, we're going to be going into detail about the common issue on the N55s, and that is the rod bearing issue. So let's get straight into it. Finally, a decent day and night trying to record a video where it's actually not raining. The car is absolutely stinking, as you can see. I've just got back from a really long drive, so it is due a clean, but I wanted to record this video before it got too dark as the sun is setting. But yeah, N55 and rod bearing issues. Let's get into it. Now, we have talked about N55 issues on the channel before, and one of the common ones being the charge pipe. However, I have gone into detail about that before. I'll put the video up in the right hand top of the corner now if you want to watch it. However, if the charge pipe breaks, it's nowhere near as dangerous and as expensive as if you get rod bearing issues and if they spin the rod bearings, which is kind of everybody's fear on these N55s. Whereas the charge pipe can be replaced. It's a pretty easy fix, and you can get an aluminium one which will eliminate that problem completely. However, it's a completely different story when it comes to the rod bearings. Alright, this is just me butting in. Hope you're enjoying the video so far. If you can give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, and enjoy the rest of the video. Thanks, guys. Now, common causes for the N55 spinning the rod bearing issues are, we'll go over it now, is oil starvation. That's one of the main ones. Obviously, if your crank and the components of the engine don't have oil lubricating them, then they're going to get hot, they're going to seize, they can stick together, metal's going to get too hot. It's just a big no-no. So that's one of the things you really want to make sure on, that I've mentioned in these videos loads of times, is about making sure that your oil is topped up. That is the only downside with these cars, with the electronic dipstick, is it's very undecisive of how full it wants the oil to be. The other day I was driving this, it came up saying low oil, so I put about 500 millilitres in, as that's what I had in the back of the boot of the car that I had spare, and then measured it again, and it came up with the oil being completely full. And then I drove it home all the way about 100 miles or so, and then it came back that the oil was low again. Got onto my drive, let the engine sit for a little bit, redid the oil test, so it measured it again without topping it up, and the oil was full to the brim again, and I hadn't even topped it up. So obviously some cars are going to drink oil. However, it is a problem with these electronic dipsticks, is you can't actually tell completely how full the engine is with oil, and it's nowhere near as reliable, in my opinion, as a complete dipstick that you can test yourself, because if the sensors are bad on your electronic one, it could be giving you a false reading, could be saying your engine's full of oil, when in reality it could be running low. So like I've mentioned before, try to make sure that you're keeping on top of your oil level. Measure it regularly. If it needs topping up, top it up. It's better to have it on the full side rather than running it low, because running it low, you're going to cause issues. So the other reason for rod bearings, we'll talk about now, is driving the car when the oil hasn't really had a good chance to heat up. Now, the oil in these cars, because it's a big engine, takes twice as long, I've noticed, to heat up than the coolant does, which makes sense. Coolant's going all around the block. The engine oil is only really on the bottom, and the top is not in the cylinders. So I have an actual screen in my car where I can measure the coolant temperature and the oil temperature, and I never really drive this car until the oil's got above 30 degrees Celsius, because when you start the car, especially on a day like today, it's about 1 degree outside. The oil is only about 3-4 degrees, which that is cold. If you start driving that straight away and giving it a hard time, that oil is thick and it's not going to go around the engine and lubricate it the way it needs to. So I'd let the oil warm up a little bit before you start driving the car hard. Now, it seemed to be that BMW's early N55 issues were more prone to this rod bearing spinning situation. I don't think it's as common in the newer models. So the 235s, I haven't really seen a lot of issues with the rod bearing spinning. It seems to only be in the 335is that I've seen a lot of it happening. If you guys have experienced it in a 235, then let me know in the comments, but I don't think it is as common in these type of cars as it is with the previous engines that BMW released. Now let's open this up and we can have a little look again. So we've talked about oil starvation, and we've also talked about the earlier generations of the N55, and we've also talked about not letting the engine oil warm up to a kind of operating temperature before you start giving it a hard time. We're also going to talk about the sumps in these cars. Now, oil starvation happens when you're going around a corner, say a racetrack for example, where all the oil is going to go to one corner of the engine because you're pulling quite a bit of like G, you could say, on that cornering that you're doing. Now, obviously, oil is all going to rush to that same corner, and some parts of it aren't going to be getting the oil that the engine needs. So BMW updated this in other versions, with like the S55 and the S58. They've all got some sort of baffled sump where it stops the oil from moving all to one side. However, you could liken the N55's oil sump to just a big open pan where the oil has room to just move around. Now, MTC are an actual company who actually make a baffled sump for the N55s, and the only reason I haven't done it to mine is it just doesn't look like a nice job to do. And the other reason is I'm very cautious when it comes to letting my oil warm up. I don't send it around track. I don't go around roundabout sideways, which we'll talk about as well. So there's many factors of why I wouldn't really need to justify spending the money on a baffled sump right now. However, it is something I will consider in the future. But the other reason I was going to discuss, as I just mentioned, is if you're sending this car sideways. Now, what that does, obviously, think about it. If you're sending the car sideways around corners and stuff, the engine RPMs are going to be quite high because you're spinning the back tyres up. And while you're doing that, you're also sending the oil like this all the time, completely sending it to different directions. Or if you're doing around in circles, then it's obviously going to be flung to one side. And that is another reason that it can spin rod bearings, is because it's getting oil starvation again. So that's something to consider. So they are some of the main things. There are slight things like manufacturing defects from the actual factory, but they're in extreme rare situations which never really happen. So the baseline of it is, if you just keep on top of good oil maintenance, so changing the filter regularly, which is here, also taking the filter apart and having a look inside of it to make sure you haven't got any metal pieces. Now, don't get me wrong, I see on Facebook groups all the time of people freaking out because they've taken their oil filter apart on an N55 and it's got one or two tiny specks of metal. That is common. The engine is going to wear as it gets miles on it, and having one or two tiny specks, like very small ones we're talking about, isn't going to be anything serious. When we're talking about issues, is this every single line of the oil filter is filled with some sort of metal debris, then obviously that's an issue, and you know you've got problems regarding your N55 rod bearings. Now, I run this car on 5W30 fully synthetic, and when I do an oil change, which I do every 4,000 miles, because I do drive the car hard, and in my opinion it's meant to be driven hard. I like the power of it, I like the sound. I don't sit on red line all the time, so you know, that's the other aspect of it. If you're just redlining the car and holding it at like 7k RPMs, it's going to cause an issue for you, because it's not meant to just be chilling there all the time. But don't get me wrong, I do frequently get to redline in this car, and I haven't had any issues with it. But regarding the oil, when you do your oil filters, which I do every 4k, when you have the car up, I always buy about a litre extra. And the reason I do that is, like I talked in the original part of the video about having 500 millilitres spare in the boot. That was because when I jack the car up, I undo the filler cap, I undo the oil filter after I've drained the oil, because it leaks otherwise. And while the whole engine's draining, when I've got the oil filter empty, I then get all of the oil filter oil out with a pump and like rags, so it's all clean oil in that housing. And then while it's underneath, I also put 500ml of clean oil in, just to flush the bottom of the sump out with some clean oil. Then I tighten the sump plug up, put the oil filter in. I don't put any oil in it, but we will talk about that, and the oil filter, well, the cooling system, like the actual radiator. That's another reason these N55 spin. But then I fill the car up with the oil and do it that way. That way, the sump has had a bit of a chance to have some clean oil in it, and it's not sitting there with old stuff still in it. Now, your oil cooler is positioned just in this grill here. So you have your oil cooler on this side, then obviously your radiators on the top and your intercooler on the bottom. Now, when people change their oil intercooler, they don't usually prime the system. And this can be a cause for spun rod bearings as well. Because like I've said, when you're doing the oil change, there's always oil on the bottom of the sump then. However, these oil lines here, which I can turn the brightness up a little bit, these ones go down to your oil cooler, which is down there. Now, when people upgrade this, or they have to replace it, some people, they don't replace the actual lines. They don't fill them with any oil or prime the system. And the reason this is bad is because if you think about it, it's then going to push air all through the system, and it could, well, it can bring back oil into the actual oil pan and make it bubbly, which obviously is going to have air in it. Now, obviously, it is going to have air when the con rods are spinning round, but it's nowhere near as much air as an unprimed system. So my suggestion would be, always try to prime the system when you are doing an oil cooler change, because you're just going to eliminate the rod bearings getting starved of oil at all. Now we'll close this and we'll start wrapping the video up, because it is getting quite dark, as you can see, and I would like to clean the car before it does get pitch black out here, because it is stinkingly dirty. However, we'll recap on the video. Just keep on top of your oil changes. I see so many people that have done like 10k miles or 15k miles without doing an oil change, and that is bad for a BMW. I don't know why BMW say to do oil changes every 10,000 miles or even longer in some cases, because the oil is like the blood of your engine, and you really want to keep it clean. You want to keep it like frequently changed, and you want to keep it in good condition, because it is just the life of your engine. And if you're chucking bad stuff in there, it's not going to do the car any good. So keep on top of the oil changes, do them frequently. Always do the filter when you're doing the oil change, because that's just 100% necessary. And don't run the car stupidly hard when it hasn't warmed up. If I was to start this car now and just straight away line up on here and just do a burnout, for example, you're literally just asking to spin your rod bearings, and it's just something really silly, and I wouldn't recommend it. I mean, you can go sideways in these cars, but if you want to pursue that, if you want to do that kind of thing, or if you want to track it, I definitely suggest getting a baffled sump, because I do think in the OG M2, which has the same engine as this, I think BMW did refine the oil pan ever so slightly, because I've seen so many M2s hit the track and push it hard, as well as doing donuts and stuff, and they never seem to have any issues. So I think BMW did refine it, but let me know in the comments down below. But apart from that, I appreciate you guys watching. Give it a thumbs up if you enjoyed the video. Subscribe to the channel to see more videos like this. When it actually becomes a nicer evening, I'll be doing some POV drives, so stay tuned for that. And let me know in the comments below if you have any questions. Don't forget to subscribe, like. Hope you enjoyed it, and I'll catch you guys in the next one. Thank you very much for watching.